I was 54 years old the morning I realized hard work had become my hiding place. It happened in the parts cage at Harland Tool, with rain ticking against the loading dock doors and the smell of cutting oil coming through the vents. I had come in early, like I always did, because the monthly shipment from Dayton was short, and nobody else knew which bins could be substituted without stopping the line. My shirt was already damp across the back. My coffee had gone cold beside the clipboard. By 7:15, I had solved 3 problems no customer would ever know existed. At 8, the plant manager, Bill Renner, walked past the cage with a folder tucked under his arm. He stopped long enough to say, "Tom, you're a lifesaver," then kept moving toward the conference room. I remember feeling proud for about 5 seconds. That sentence had been the music of my career. Reliable, useful, needed. The man who could be counted on before anyone else even knew there was trouble. What I believed then was simple. If I kept showing up, kept fixing what broke, kept carrying the awkward work nobody wanted, somebody would eventually notice in a way that changed my life. I did not think I had to ask. I did not think I had to make a case for myself. I believed the work would speak, and I believed silence made me honorable. Now, at 73, I can see the trap inside that belief. Work does speak, but it does not negotiate. It does not knock on a manager's door and explain what your life is worth. It does not tell anyone you are tired. It simply gets absorbed into the machine, especially when you make it look effortless. That morning, I was still certain effort had a kind of moral force. I thought the people who talked about promotions and pay bands were playing a smaller game. I thought I was playing the long one. Then Bill opened the conference room door, and through the glass, I saw a younger supervisor named Kenny Lewis sit at the head of the table, smiling like he had already been told good news. I turned back to the parts bins, but something in my chest had shifted. I did not know yet what had happened. I only knew the work I had done before. Sunrise suddenly felt heavier than it had an hour earlier. I remember the exact sound of the bin drawer sliding open because I had heard it thousands of times without thinking. That morning it sounded like a little accusation. The plant was asking me for the same answer it always asked for, and I was giving it even while some deeper part of me knew I had never asked the plant for anything back. I did not call it fear yet. I called it responsibility, because that word let me keep moving without admitting what I wanted. I wish I had named it sooner. The announcement came after lunch, during one of those meetings where everyone pretends the folding chairs are comfortable. Bill stood near the time clock with a sheet of paper in both hands. The plant floor had gone half quiet behind him, machines still thumping in the far bay, while the rest of us stood around holding safety glasses and paper cups. He talked about growth, leadership, fresh thinking, and the next chapter for Harland Tool. Then he said Kenny Lewis would become operations coordinator, the role I had quietly expected for almost 3 years. Nobody gasped. Nobody looked shocked. That hurt more than the announcement itself. Kenny was not a bad man. He was sharp, friendly, and good with spreadsheets. He knew how to stand beside Bill at meetings and ask questions that sounded like strategy. He also knew how to talk about his work before anybody asked. I had mistaken that for showing off. In my mind, the shop respected the person who kept his head down. Kenny understood something I had refused to learn. Being valuable and being visible are not the same thing. After the meeting, Margaret called my work phone because she needed to know whether I wanted stew or pork chops for dinner. I told her stew was fine. She heard something in my voice and asked what happened. I said, "Nothing." Long day. That was how I handled disappointment back then. I folded it small, put it in my pocket, and called it maturity. No, what I believed then was that bitterness would make me weak. If I admitted I wanted the job, I would have to admit I had been passed over. If I admitted I had been passed over, I would have to ask why. And if I asked why, I might hear that my work had been useful, but my silence had made me easy to leave in place. Now I understand that I confused dignity with disappearance. There is a difference between not complaining and not speaking. I had trained everyone around me to expect my sacrifice without discussion, then felt wounded when they accepted the arrangement. That afternoon, Kenny walked over and shook my hand. He said he hoped he could still lean on me while he learned the role. I said, "Of course." I even meant it. But when he left, I wrote the next day's production notes with a pressure behind my eyes I would not let become tears. The company did not steal that promotion from me in one moment. I helped give it away over years, one quiet yes at a time. A few men patted Kenny on the back, then patted me on the shoulder as if the two gestures belonged to the same celebration. I kept my face arranged. I had spent so many years being easy to work with that even my disappointment tried to be polite. That was the part nobody could have seen unless they were living inside my ribs. I did not know how expensive politeness could become. For the next few months, I became the most helpful disappointed man in the building. Kenny came to me with questions about supplier delays, overtime patterns, warranty returns, and which machinists could handle the older lathes when the computer controls acted up. I answered every question. I stayed late to walk him through the inventory records I had built myself, records nobody had asked me to build, but everyone depended on once they existed. He thanked me often, and I told myself his gratitude proved I still mattered. The strange part is that my resentment did not make me less hard-working. It made me work harder. I arrived earlier. I cleaned up errors before they became visible. I wrote better notes. I covered for Kenny when he forgot to call a vendor. I thought if I kept proving the decision had been wrong, the truth would eventually become impossible to ignore. What I believed then was that excellence had a delayed reward. I imagined someone in an office looking down at the numbers and saying, "We made a mistake. Tom should have been the one." That scene never happened. Companies rarely hold private ceremonies for the people who quietly save them from their own bad choices. At home, Margaret watched me move through evenings like a man still at work. I would sit at the kitchen table after dinner with Plant, reports spread between the salt shaker and the napkin holder. She would tell me about Claire's school fundraiser or Evan needing help with his car, and I would nod without really entering the room. I told myself I was providing. Now I think I was hiding from the humiliation of wanting more than I had asked for. One Friday in October, Bill pulled me aside near the vending machines. He said Kenny had praised my support and that the transition was going smoothly because of me. I remember waiting for the second sentence, a raise, a title, a promise that the next opening would be mine. Bill only clapped my shoulder and said, "We're lucky you're steady." Steady. That word landed like a locked door. I did not understand then that being the steady one can become a role other people protect for their own comfort. If you are always the person who absorbs pressure, nobody is eager to move you into a place where you might stop absorbing it. That night, I sat in the driveway after everyone had gone to bed. The garage light hummed above the windshield. My hands smelled faintly of a metal even after washing. For the first time, I wondered whether hard work had built a reputation I could not escape. The driveway became the only place where I let the truth sit beside me without interruption. Inside the house, I was husband, father, fixer, bill payer. In the truck, with the engine ticking itself cool, I could admit that being praised for endurance was beginning to feel less like respect and more like a sentence I had helped write. The winter after Kenny's promotion, Harland Tool lost the Bexley account, and the whole plant started breathing differently. Bexley was not our largest customer, but it was the customer that made the schedule feel predictable. Once their orders slowed, overtime disappeared. Men who had complained about Saturday shifts now stood near the bulletin board hoping their names would not be missing from the next schedule. Bill began holding meetings with the office door closed. Kenny stopped smiling so easily. I did what I had always done. I found waste in the process, called 2 vendors for better pricing, and rebuilt the repair rotation so fewer machines sat idle. The numbers improved. Not enough to save everything, but enough to keep the line from falling apart. Bill thanked Kenny in the next management meeting. Kenny thanked his team. I was part of the team, which is a polite way of saying nobody had to name me. What I believed then was that fairness would eventually correct itself if the facts were strong enough. I had spent my life trusting facts. The shipment arrived, or it did not. The machine ran, or it failed. The count matched, or it was wrong. But careers are not only built on facts, they are built on who frames the facts, who is in the room when the story is told, and who has practiced saying his own name without shame. One afternoon, I walked into the break room and found Kenny rehearsing a presentation with a young engineer named Marcy. He had slides showing savings from the changes I had made. My stomach tightened before my mind could form a sentence. He was not lying exactly. He had managed the review. He had presented the plan. But the old repair rotation, the vendor calls, the substitutions, the history behind the choices, all of that lived in my head and my hands. I could have said something. I could have pulled Kenny aside. I could have asked Bill to let me present the operational details. Instead, I poured coffee I did not want and told Marcy the chart looked good. Now I know that silence can look noble from the inside and convenient from the outside. I thought I was avoiding conflict. What I was really doing was allowing my work to leave my possession the moment it helped someone else. That evening, Margaret asked why I was so quiet. I almost told her. I almost said I was angry, embarrassed, and tired of being useful in ways that never changed my paycheck. But Evan walked in looking for jumper cables, and the moment passed. I helped him in the garage, grateful for a problem I knew how to fix. I went back to my station with coffee burning my tongue and the kind of anger that has no clean place to go. The machines kept running, the phones kept ringing. That was what made it so easy to bury the moment. A busy day can hide almost any wound if you are willing to keep moving. By the time I turned 56, I had become the man new hires were told to follow for their first week. They would trail behind me, through the plant with clean boots and nervous faces while I explained which forklift had a sticky brake, which machinist hated being rushed, and which customer labels had to be double-checked, because one wrong digit could ruin a shipment. I liked teaching them. That is the part that makes the story complicated. My work was not misery. I found pride in knowing things deeply. I liked the rhythm of a place that made sense to my hands. But pride can become a curtain if you are not careful. A young man named Luis started that spring. He was 26, polite, and hungry in a way I recognized, but had never allowed myself to show. On his third day, he asked me how long I had been at Harland. I told him 31 years. He looked impressed, then asked, "What did you want to move into after this?" Not what did I do, not when would I retire. What did I want to move into? The question bothered me because I did not have an answer. What I believed then was that wanting a next thing at my age was foolish. I told myself stability was enough, that a man with a mortgage nearly paid off and children almost grown should stop reaching. But the truth was that I had trained myself not to want, because wanting required action, and action might expose how much time I had already lost. Luis lasted 8 months before leaving for a logistics firm across town. On his last day, he brought donuts and thanked me for teaching him. He also thanked Kenny for helping him think about advancement. I stood there with powdered sugar on my fingers, realizing the young man had learned the work from me and the career from someone else. Now I understand why that moment stung. It was not jealousy of Luis, it was recognition. He had done in 8 months what I had not done in decades. He treated his labor as something to direct, not merely donate. After he left, Bill asked if I knew anyone else reliable. I almost laughed. Reliable had become the word everyone used when they wanted the benefits of my judgment without the burden of my ambition. That night, I opened the old file cabinet in our spare room and found performance reviews going back 15 years. Every one of them praised my dedication. None of them promised movement. I had mistaken compliments for a path. They were not a path. They were receipts. Luis did not mean to expose anything. That is why the question stayed with me. He had not accused me of settling. He had simply assumed a man's work should lead somewhere he could name. I had spent decades making sure the work led anywhere except into a conversation that might scare me. The first time I finally asked for more, my voice sounded strange to me. It was a Thursday morning in March, and I had rehearsed the sentence in the shower, in the truck, and again while pretending to check the loading schedule. Bill's office smelled like burnt coffee and printer toner. His blinds were tilted halfway closed, striping his desk with light. I stood in front of him with my cap in my hands, feeling like a boy asking permission to enter a room I had helped build. I told him I wanted my role reviewed. I said the plant relied on my judgment beyond my title. I mentioned the savings from the vendor changes, the training I provided, the repair rotation, and the years of process knowledge I carried. I expected him to be surprised. He looked more uncomfortable than surprised. Bill said he valued me tremendously. He said budgets were tight. He said titles had already been aligned after the restructuring. Then he said something I can still hear clearly. "Tom, I wish you had brought this up earlier." That sentence stayed with me longer than the disappointment. What I believed then, even in that office, was that if my case was strong enough, lateness should not matter. I wanted my years of effort to arrive all at once and speak on my behalf. But years do not arrive as evidence unless you have been gathering them, naming them, and placing them where decisions are made. Bill offered a small raise that did not match the responsibility. I accepted it because refusing felt dramatic. I told Margaret that night, and she sat across from me at the kitchen table without saying much. Finally, she asked, "Oh, are you relieved or angry?" I said I did not know. She said, "Then maybe you are both." Now I understand that asking late is better than never asking, but it cannot recover every lost season. I had spent decades proving I deserved a conversation I never initiated. By the time I spoke, the organization had already written me into a supporting role. The next morning, Kenny stopped by and congratulated me on the raise. He meant well. That made it worse. He had no idea he had become a symbol in a private story I had never told him. I went back to the parts cage and checked the incoming orders. The work still needed doing. That was the cruel comfort of it. No matter what I learned about myself, the bins were still waiting to be counted. I drove home slower than usual, not because the weather was bad, but because I did not want to carry the answer through the front door. The raises should have felt like proof. Instead, it felt like a receipt for years I had sold too cheaply. Margaret saw that before I knew how to say it. I sat with both feelings, relief and insult, until they became impossible to separate. I had started asking, but I had not started soon enough. In my last year at Harland Tool, they brought in a consultant to study efficiency. Her name was Denise. She wore black glasses, carried a tablet, and asked questions nobody in the plant had asked in years. She followed me for 2 days, watching how I handled shortages, phone calls, machine delays, and the little human negotiations that kept the place from turning against itself. On the second afternoon, she stopped near the shipping desk and said, "You're doing about 3 jobs." I smiled because I thought she was complimenting me. Then she asked, "Why is only one of them on paper?" I did not have a good answer. That question hurt because it was clean. It did not come with office politics or old history. She saw in 2 days what the company had depended on for years. I had allowed invisible work to become my identity. I had been proud of absorbing what should have been named, divided, paid for, or refused. I had confused endurance with value. What I believed then was beginning to crack. I could still feel the old loyalty in me, the urge to defend Harland, Bill, Kenny, and even myself. I wanted to say that good people do what needs doing. I still believe that to a point, but now I know there is a difference between serving a place and disappearing inside it. Denise's report led to a few changes after I retired. They split parts coordination, training, and vendor follow-up into separate responsibilities. 3 people took pieces of the work I had carried under one title. When Kenny told me that at my retirement lunch, he said it like proof of how important I had been. I nodded, but inside I felt a grief I could not politely explain. At the lunch, Bill gave a speech about my dedication. People clapped. Margaret squeezed my hand under the table. There was a cake with blue frosting and a picture of a wrench drawn across it. I was moved. I was also angry, and the anger embarrassed me. A man can be grateful and still see too late what gratitude cannot repair. Now, when I think about that season, I do not blame one person. Not Bill, not Kenny, not the company alone. I was there for every choice that trained them how to treat me. The hardest truth was not that hard work failed me. The hardest truth was that I asked hard work to do jobs it cannot do. It cannot speak for your future. It cannot set your price. It cannot decide when enough is enough. A few weeks after retirement, I heard that the new coordinator had requested a title review after only 4 months. Part of me wanted to resent him. Another part of me admired the plainness of it. He had not waited for exhaustion to become evidence. He had named the job while the job was still taking shape. That was the difference I had missed. He was not less loyal. He was simply less willing to vanish. I keep one Harland Tool badge in the drawer beside my reading chair. The plastic is scratched, and the photograph shows a man with darker hair, thicker shoulders, and a face that looks more certain than he had any right to be. Sometimes my grandson Caleb picks it up when he visits. He likes old things with clips, buttons, and faded numbers. Once he asked me if I was the boss there. I told him no. Then he asked why not. Children can step into the center of a life without knowing they have done it. I could have given him the easy answer. I could have said I did not want that kind of responsibility, or that things were different back then, or that the company had its own way of choosing people. Instead, I told him I worked hard, but I did not always speak clearly about what I wanted. He nodded like that made sense, then went back to clipping the badge onto his shirt. What I believed as a younger man was that good work created a debt the world would feel obligated to repay. I believed effort was a kind of language everyone respected equally. I believed modesty would protect me from seeming greedy. Those beliefs made me dependable, but they also made me passive in rooms where my future was being decided. What I understand now is not that hard work is useless. That would be a cheap lesson, and it would be false. Hard work fed my family. It kept our house warm. It gave me pride, skill, and friendships I still value. The mistake was believing hard work was enough by itself. It was not. It needed a voice. It needed direction. It needed boundaries. It needed the courage to say, this is what I have done, and this is where I intend to go. I did not lose everything, that matters to say. Margaret and I built a decent life. Our children grew up knowing I would come home. There is honor in that. But I also lost years of possibility because I thought wanting more would stain the work I had already done. That is the part I would tell the younger version of myself if I could catch him before dawn in the parts cage, coffee cooling beside the clipboard. I would not tell him to stop working hard. I would tell him to stop hiding behind it. The work may speak, but it will not speak the whole sentence. You have to finish it yourself. Caleb still does not understand why that badge means so much to me. Maybe someday he will. Maybe he will look at some small object from his own working life and realize it holds not only what he did, but what he failed to ask for while doing it. I hope he learns that part sooner. That hope is probably the most honest inheritance I can offer him. It took me decades to understand that.